In this video, we will be covering the plywood sub-roadbed for the hidden level of the Q&NE expansion. And then we're going to carry on with finishing up at the lower industrial zone, tidying up the last bits of the outbound transfer. And then we're going to do a bit of rail fanning, chasing it towards the Q&NE Conrail Junction. And so it begins. Here we see the delivery from Home Depot. 5 sheets of 4x8, 5/8 inch thick plywood, a dozen 2x4s, a dozen 1x4s, and a half a dozen 1x2s. The first task at hand is to cut up the plywood. And for this I turn to my old friend, a 30-year-old Sears Craftsman scrolling jigsaw. Using the digital plans that I had created on my laptop, I laid out the traced sections from the basement floor onto the 4x8 sheets of plywood. With the tracing paper and plywood in full scale in front of you, there's a natural tendency to want to improve on things, and sure enough, there were ways that I found to make the use of plywood more efficient. I use the 2x4s as a very low workbench. So long as the scrolling saw doesn't hit the ground, you're fine. It's not easy on the back though. And there's our first piece cut out for the new layout expansion. The first sheet was cut up rather quickly, and I felt quite proud that there was very little in the way of waste or leftovers. Not to worry, these bits and pieces will get used up. Here we see the second sheet of plywood ready to be cut. You can barely make out the tracing markings on the plywood. And to the left you can see the third sheet of plywood being readied with the tracing paper. Second sheet done. Moving on to the third. Third sheet looks rather sparse, only 2 large pieces, but not to worry, there is a need for that large section in the middle for the visible portion of the layout that we'll talk about in a future video. And with those 2 last pieces, we are done with the plywood sub-roadbed for the staging level of the new layout extension. If you squint, you'd swear the plywood is smiling. And for those of you wondering how much of a mess this made, here is the sawdust remnants from all this cutting. Now the fun part begins, checking to make sure it actually fits. You'll note that I used a coding system to make sure that when I assembled the actual plywood pieces, they match to where they're supposed to be. So each end has a letter and a number. Here you see the beginning of the loop where I called it piece number 0. And it has ends A, F, and G. And you'll notice the 3 pieces of wood that abut each side of this triangular shaped piece of wood have those letters on both sides of the cuts. So this way you can assemble it like a jigsaw puzzle. This is also when you find out you've made a mistake or forgotten to do something. Here you can see I forgot to trim a piece on one edge. That's a quick fix with the jigsaw. Stepping back here, we can take an overall view of the lowest level of the layout, the return loop. Although it looks like it doesn't fit and there's overlap and kinks in the plywood, it actually does fit. But what has to happen is I need to notch out a bit of the plywood to account for the corners in the basement walls. Also, when you lay the plywood on the floor, it's pushed out a little bit by the footings on the bottom of the wall. When the layout is actually raised up 4 feet, it'll actually be touching the wall. Here we see the second half of the first turn of the helix, and it suffers from the same problem, being pushed out from the wall because of the footing. Again, this will resolve itself once the benchwork is built and the plywood is raised up so it can butt up against the wall. I deliberately left a little bit of overlap between the second and third half turns of the helix just in case I needed a bit of adjustment. And so here's an overview of the whole plywood subroad bed. It appears to fit. Of course, there are always opportunities for improvement. Here we see a slight trimming that would be useful to make sure that the fascia, when it's installed, is butt up against both pieces of plywood in the helix. Here we see a gap that I left deliberately because I didn't want a joint right above a turnout throw bar. You can see that circle on the craft paper. So I'm going to have to trim back the piece to the left and put in a longer splice section between the two pieces of plywood. All in all, I'm quite pleased with the way this turned out. And now the fun part begins, how to figure out how to frame the benchwork to support it all. And while I try and figure out the benchwork, let's take a look at the layout and see where we last left off at the lower industrial zone. When we were last down at this end of the lower yard, our local yard assignment, MP15 DC number 20, was trapped between the cars it picked up in a G zone with other cars that had been placed on the G zone lead. So here we're going to see the crew of the transfer with their GP38-2s sort out the cars for the actual transfer run back to the interchange yard. There's some blocking that they have to do, so you see them make a few passes back and forth till they get their cars in the right order. With the lead to G-Zone Industries now cleared, our MP15 DC and the local switcher can pull out the cars they pulled from the bulk transfer facility and the refrigerated warehouse for the transfer crew to grab hold of and add to their train. While our road crew was busy doubling over onto its train, the local switcher with the MP15 DC reached back and grabbed what will become the head end of the transfer. With this final move, our road crew will be ready with its completed consist to make the run up the hill to the junction and interchange yard. Now that our train has been put together, we'll just do our final brake test, check in with the yard office, and we'll be on our way. And here we see our transfer crew cresting the grade, approaching the junction with Conrail. Please tune in to our next video when we will carry on with more on the expansion, and we'll do some rail fanning, Conrail style. As always, thank you for watching. If you enjoy layout improvement videos, here are a few others that you may find interesting. If you're not already a subscriber, you can click on the logo on the top right-hand corner of your screen.